funny how I came to be where I am today, and what kind of got me started, and really what the future looks like, at least with what I got going on. But either way, thank you, Pastor, for having me. Thank you, everyone else, and thank you to my friend Stanley. And it's funny because when you talked about how I was going to go on for like an hour, again, being underprepared, I'm like, man, an entire hour. But what's crazy is this is how amazing God is, because usually a normal person would kind of like buckle and be like, uh-oh, no one told me an hour. What am I supposed to talk about? I'm like, do I start scrambling for like Bible verses now? Like, how am I going to fill this hour? But I was just filled with peace because God is good. Amen. He already knew what I was going to be talking about today. And all I have to do is just be a vessel to be used by Him and just kind of convey to you, again, my personal testimony. So as most of you probably know, I do go by the alias of Conservative Latino online. And the reason why I kind of went by this name is not because I wanted to have this cool little name that everyone knew me by, but you guys know better than anyone how hard it is to be a Republican or even just a conservative in general in this day and age, and especially in a state like California, where we are targeted, where our churches are being shut down, while brothels are able to stand open, and so I went by Conservative Latino because I was new to the political scene. I'm 33 years young. I have 3 kids. I have my 13-year-old son, Hector. I have my 12-year-old daughter, Zoe, and then my little 4-year-old that came as a surprise. We were like, all right, we got the oldest son, and then we got the little daughter. Perfect. We're just a family of 4, and then 2016 came around, my wife's like, oh my gosh, from the bathroom. And I'm like, please let it be a cockroach. I'm just like, please tell me she found a cockroach in the bathroom. And I walk in there and she's got this little stick, and I'm like, yay, a blessing from God. And that's exactly what it is. It's a blessing from God. So when I left, we've had our family, we actually got married when we were 18 in typical Hispanic fashion. We get married young. That way we can enjoy our 40s. Right? But, yeah, I know, right? People always say, like, why are you having so young? I'm like, why not? I mean, as long as we're married, and so she was raised Catholic, I was raised Protestant Christian, and she ended up converting to Protestant Christian. She was then baptized, which is crazy because of all her siblings, there's 5 of them, she was the only one that was never baptized to the Catholic Church. And so when she converted to, at that time we were Pentecostal Christians. Now we're non-denominational, and now there's no church that we can actually attend. So we're like proactively looking for like a new church. But to all fairness to my pastor, who rest in peace, he ended up passing away due to COVID. Actually, at least that's what they're saying on the certificate. Right. But the thing that got him was multiple heart attacks, unfortunately. And so we got a phone call late at night. I think it was a Sunday actually, and we were just talking about it, like, what are we going to do about church? And the reason why our church was shut, it was not because of the pandemic, it's because we actually shared the temple with another church, and they were very strict. They're like, you guys are renting from us, you're not allowed to be in here. I think it was like a Seventh-day Adventist church, I'm not sure. But they made it very clear they didn't want us, and so unfortunately my pastor did pass away, and so we actually are looking for a new church. But with that being said, getting back to my personal testimony, I joined the military when I was 18 years old. It was 2005-ish, 2006. 2001 had just happened. I remember that day very vividly. I'm sure probably a lot of you here remember 9/11. And my father, he's a veteran, Army veteran, and then my grandfather, he's an Army veteran too. So you said I am first generation on my mother's side. I am first generation. On my father's side, I'm like 4th or 5th generation. My great-great-grandfather migrated from Italy to Puerto Rico and then Idaho. And then he owned a potato farm in Italy, and that's exactly what he came out here to do as well, open up like a potato farm / company. So I come from a long line of veterans, and praise the Lord for that, because it was an honor. It was an absolute honor to be able to serve in the military and to kind of see firsthand what it really takes to defend our freedoms. Yeah. To sign up and know willingly that you're signing a piece of paper that says, God, if anything ever should happen to me, this is where the money goes to my wife, this is to my kids. and I will die defending this great country that allows religious freedoms.
Yes.
And we talk about immigrants that come into this country. A lot of them come here seeking that religious freedom.
That's right.
That they're not able to possibly do in their communist or socialist country. China being a perfect example of that, where they beat up Christians, where they persecute them, where they kill them. There's like a very famous photo that I'm sure probably everyone's seen, but it's a military officer from China, and she's got like a wooden board behind a Christian, and you can see her face, she's beat up, she's bleeding and everything, because they found out she was Christian and they wanted her to deny Christ. And so they put her up before all these people, and they were just beating her. They had like a wooden board where whenever they'd hit her, instead of her head just kind of going back randomly, it would hit the board as well. And so that's the persecution that we see, that we are witnessing today. And even though here in the West we do have religious freedom, that freedom is being trampled on every single day. At first I think most of you could probably attest to this, that when this whole virus came here, I for one really thought that it was a biological weapon that had been released not just on us, but on possibly China or whatever country decided to release this biological weapon to destroy our economy and to have us live in fear and to close down. And so I didn't really know what was going on with this new virus. And I think a lot of us were probably like, should we shut down? Should we, what's going to happen? Mm-hmm. And as the weeks went by, they're like, okay, 2 weeks to slow the spread. I'm like, okay, sure. I'll give the government 2 weeks. And then what is it, day 300 and something now, right? 2 weeks to slow the spread. And then eventually I started seeing what wasn't closed and what was allowed to stay open. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would think to myself, if this pandemic was as deadly as they said, right? That the Costco's, because they have millions of dollars, they would just hire people to deliver the food straight at your door. I mean, they have the technology to do it. If you go to Walmart.com, on your shopping cart, you can create a profile and you can put whatever you want. And I'm like, well, if it's as deadly as they say it is. But it was the small businesses that were hit the most. It was the churches that were hit. It was anywhere and everywhere where the everyday American is thriving, whether it be through faith, which is a church, or whether it was small business, because Hispanics, believe it or not, are very entrepreneurial, and a lot of us have small businesses. And I remember during those marches, there was a lot of, because we were at the Open California rally, right? Right. And there was, when we showed up, it was Jorge Ventura. I don't know if any of you follow him. Yeah. Great guy. Him and I were going to go cover the rallies. And instead of making a left to the Open California one, we ended up making a right because we saw a bunch of people right in front of the city hall. And we're like, well, I think this is it. And so we went up there and we noticed that it was actually a lot more Democrats. It was undocumented. It was immigrants that were fighting for their lives, that were out there protesting, saying, please let us open up our businesses. This affects us as Hispanics, especially the undocumented. We interviewed a couple people, and mostly Spanish speakers. And I remember this immigrant mother. She was a mother, I believe, to 3 or 4 children, single mom. She had been working 2 jobs. She wasn't able to work any job, and she was developing anxiety and depression because she wasn't able to pay for her rent. And I just remember her breaking down and crying, and I'm just holding the camera there, trying not to break down myself, because I'm like, this could be anyone's mom. I remember how much I struggled and my family struggled when we were growing up. Growing up in Section 8 housing, growing up not knowing, if we were going to have enough food for the next week, having to eat rice and beans because we were just lived in poverty. And I just imagine what all these children are going through today. And it is on all of us here that we're so thankful that we have a church that's remained open. We have a pastor that's remained a warrior, right, through all these closures that have said, no, we know where this is going. We've probably seen this before. Right? We're not going to allow it to happen. And so I thank God for every pastor that has been defying, being smart about it, not just defying for the sake of defying, but realizing that hey, wait a minute, this isn't right. That's right. What's happening? Why is South Dakota, right, the Republican governor there, she said, I could never find it in my heart as a governor to look at someone and say, you're not essential. We need to close you down. Wow. She said, I left it up to the people. And isn't that amazing that the government realizes their place in our lives, that, hey, we elected you. You work for us.
Amen.
Not like what Joe Biden said, right? Like, hey, you know, like you got it to the construction worker or like a union leader, right? Remember, he's like, hey, you work for me, you know? And then Joe Biden's like, no, I don't. He's like, no, yeah, you do. And he like caught himself. He's like, whoops, you know, like he's so elitist. These politicians, and they're on both sides. These politicians, they're so elitist, they're so out of touch with the regular person that they think that the more years in government, it gives them more and more power. Because that's what they crave now. They crave so much power. They don't want to lose. Imagine, like what's after Congress? What's after that? I mean, it's either you climb the corporate ladder of government and you go all the way to president, or you lose your job and you lose your benefits and you lose your salary, and then here goes your $20, $30 a pint ice cream, Nancy Pelosi, you know? And I mean, it's just crazy. And so here we are struggling. El pueblo de Dios, right?
Yeah.
The common person just struggling just to get by. And I don't think it's much to ask to just, hey, just let us work. We don't want $1,200. We don't want now $600, right?
Yeah.
Half of that?
Maybe.
We don't, maybe, yeah. We don't want or need that. What we need is to be able to just go to work and provide for our families. Why is a Costco employee more smarter than us in us just being able to operate the way we work?
That's right.
It doesn't matter where you work. The rules should be the same everywhere. You cannot have some open states and not have other open states. It just doesn't make sense.
That's right.
So what ended up happening, going back a little bit to how I got all started with the Conservative Latino and everything, was when I left the military, I was looking at lists of, well, what do I do now? I just served my country for 11 years. Everyone kept telling me, like, you're dumb for leaving because you could have just retired at 20. But I wasn't happy. I had grown anxious, I had anxiety, I had depression. Even though I was ranking up and everything, I saw a system that kind of catered to the lowest in the barrel. People that I was just like, how are you a supervisor? How are you in charge of people's lives? And I just couldn't deal with that anymore. Because even though I was ranking up, people still treated each other either wrongfully or you know, they saw you as less, or depending on what your job was. So my job was a cook. Because everyone knows you need a Mexican in the kitchen, right? Yeah. If you want good food, I'm sorry to say. You can go anywhere. You can go to Panda Express, Key of Change, anywhere. There's always a Mexican. Come on. No, but so that was my job. And so other people that had different jobs, you know, if they were like gun technicians or if they were riflemen, they just saw me as below them because I was just a cook. Hey man, you're just a cookie. And I was just like, but we're all out here for the same mission. We're all out here to defend our country. We're all out here to do what's right and to make sure that our Constitution is upheld and that our country is defended against any enemy, foreign or domestic. But that's just not the way it worked. And so I was just like, all right, I think I gotta leave now. And so when I told my wife, having just had our little surprise baby, at that time, because it was 2016 when he was born, I wanted to leave 2017. She's like, well, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, well, thankfully we're Hispanic. We have like 30 cousins and aunts and uncles and everything. Someone's bound to take us in, right? Until I bounce back. But we ended up deciding to come back, and I was like, well, what am I going to do as far as school? So if a lot of you don't know, the military does offer a nice little incentive if you decide to enlist, which is called the GI Bill or the Post 9/11 Bill. It's a free scholarship to you if you complete at least 4 years of active duty, and if you are honorably discharged, you get this scholarship. So while you're on this scholarship, it pays for 3 years of schooling, and it pays you to go to school. And it pays you depending on what the cost of living is around your area. So Los Angeles being one of the highest cost of living, because thank you, progressives, right? I was getting around $3,000 a month. So I'm like, okay, the $3,000 will cover the rent, it will cover the groceries and some bills. Then my wife has a job, and then I'll just go to school full time. And at that time, I was thinking to myself, like, well, what is it that I'm really passionate about? What do I want to do? Do I want to continue being a chef? And I'm like, I think I'm burnt out. I was deep frying for 11 years, and I basically smelled like cod, like fried cod. You know, I was just like, my wife would always just come home, she's like, oh my gosh, you smell like deep fat fryer. You know, like the fryer. She's like, you always smell like just, like it's caked on me, like just the oil, you know? And when I'd sweat, I would just have like marinara sauce. And so I was just like, I'm kind of tired of the restaurant industry. And that's actually how I ended up catering for Stallion. Was because at the time, my cousin David and I had started a catering business because I was a chef. I was able to use the military base to be able to like cook large amounts of food. And so when he had reached out to us, because he knew we had the culinary business, he asked us to cater for his wedding, and we said, of course. And so stepped away completely from that, and I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do. So I started talking to some cousins that were, nurses, some of them doctors, etc. And they're like, well, with healthcare, you'll always have a job, and the benefits are great. And I'm like, okay, why don't I do this? Why don't I take all my prerequisites, and then once I get into the actual core nursing classes, I'll take a look to see if that's really my calling. Is nursing really my calling? And so I kind of did it with just the mentality of, I need a stable job. I need something that's just not going to be, automatized or go to like a robot in 5 years or 10 years. And so I'll go with nursing. Even though I didn't feel passionate about it, I was like, I'll try it out. And so I'm doing all my prerequisites, I'm doing all my English classes, math classes, everything. And it's great, it's going great. I'm meeting a lot of good people, I'm getting to talk to other people, I'm getting the whole college experience. I felt like that movie with Adam Sandler, where he's like the oldest one there. And then
Billy Madison.
Yeah, Billy Madison, yeah. Where he's like the oldest one there and everyone else is just children. Because like a lot of these students that I was in school with, we're a lot younger. I'm like the only 30-year-old there, and I just remember like one of my friends, she was telling me like, how old are you? And I'm like, how old do you think I am? And she's like, 42, 42. And I was like,
my Lord.
All right, we're no longer friends now. I was like, man, this is interesting for sure. And I remember my first class was a speech class. It was like at 5 p.m. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen the West Coast University off of the 170. 170. So I went to that school there. And so I was taking my prereqs and I was doing speech, and I noticed as I'm trying to meet people and just trying to make friends, of course, I noticed that I was a lot older, but so I tried to get some of the older crowd to kind of befriend them. And I noticed there was a guy that kind of looked like me in age. And so I started talking to him. His name is Jose Fregoso. He's actually my good friend still today. And I noticed that on this particular day for speech class, he had a very unique looking shirt. And on this shirt was 2 police officers arresting an activist. That activist just so happened to be Bernie Sanders.
Oh.
So a lot of you probably, I don't know if you know, but Bernie Sanders, he's been a lifelong activist. Yeah. And whether you like to admit it or not, he has done a lot to gain people's trust. And they feel like he's always fought for the little guy. And so it was able to get my friend, and I was like, hey, like, what's with your shirt? And he's like, oh, this is Bernie Sanders. I'm like, oh yeah, he ran in 2016. And full disclosure, I didn't really become politically active until after I got out of the military. When I was in the military, the only thing that mattered was my job, retaining that job, and making sure that my family was okay. Yeah. That's the only things that really mattered to me. Right. I'll be honest with you guys, even before that with politics, I always just thought that was rich white people stuff. I'm like, that has nothing to do with Latinos. We got no influence over that. Let them just vote themselves in, vote themselves out, whatever. Because even when I was growing up, my immigrant mother's like, we're here to work. We're not here to play games. We're here to work and do right for our families. And so she had never voted before either. She never got politically involved or anything. And it was this specific shirt that is like, I call it the number one. I tell my friend all the time, like, you got to sign that shirt, and then I'll sign that shirt, and we got to frame that shirt, because that's what literally led me to start thinking like, well, why did Bernie Sanders appeal to this guy? Because I remember all my friends in the military telling me that this guy was a communist, Bernie Sanders. And I'm like, why did it attract Fregoso? Why did it attract Hispanics and Latinos? And it was later that he told me it was the messaging, that he fought for the little people, yada yada. But that's like every politician's message, right? We'll fight for the little people. Yeah, and then now they forgot Black Lives Matter. They're like, all right, bye. We won. Thanks, suckers. They cast him aside. No, yeah. But so me and him started having just civil debate. We're like, what attracted you about him? What specifically? And I remember that when I was in the military, everyone wanted me to vote Donald Trump, because I think it's a natural occurrence that in the military, you have a lot more conservative, patriot-loving people. A lot of my friends, including Hispanics, African Americans, whoever it was, they all voted for Trump. And I was just like, why? This guy is racist. He hates Mexicans. And they're like, bro, you gotta listen to listen to the tapes, watch the videos, stop watching Telemundo, Univision. You gotta stop doing that. And I'm just like, well, yeah, those are my main sources of information. You're right. And so, as soon as I said those, I hear some triggered people. Esos amigos. Yeah, and so we started talking, and it got to the point where we were talking politics every single time we'd have class together. And people were like, man, can you guys shut up about politics already? That's all you guys talk about is gun laws and this and that, and Trump's racist. No, he's not. Bernie Sanders is a communist. No, he's not. He's a democratic socialist. You know, and so they're like, you guys should just come up with like your own podcast and do it there. And we're like, interesting. I'm like, that is interesting. And so I started doing a lot more research into like Turning Point USA. I started looking at PragerU. I started hearing a lot more conservative voices because what I saw was that the conservative movement inside the Republican Party, because there are different movements inside the Republican Party, right? Everyone thinks that everyone that is Republican is a conservative. That is a lie.
That's right.
A conservative is a lifestyle. And I said this in the PragerU video. I said conservatism is a lifestyle. It's values and morals that you uphold and you take into your family and your children and you adopt them. And I think that it's one of the closest movements to even biblical speaking.
That's right.
Right? We are conservative by nature. We're pro-nuclear family. We're not for abortions.
That's right.
We're not promoting the LGBT propaganda-ish, going into the churches now and teaching kids. And no, we're not about that. We're just very family-oriented and very conservative. And so what we ended up doing was we created the Free Thinking Latinos. And so we wanted to show people that here you have this communist, my friend Jose Fregoso, that's what I called him all the time. I'm like, oh, hey guys, my name is Anthony Cabasa, I'm one of your hosts, and here's my communist friend. And he's like, bro, you gotta start calling me that. And I'm like, I'm sorry, man, I don't know how you voted for this guy. But not only, and here's the thing, he didn't just vote for Bernie Sanders, he helped campaign for him. So he was very passionate. He was in there, I mean, he was in there. He was like, man, I'm gonna vote for this guy, we're gonna get this guy elected, we're finally gonna have, victory in politics and this and that. I'm like, okay, buddy. And then Trump won and made everyone cry, right? And so we ended up starting a podcast, we started recording. We literally, the way we did it was we just grabbed our phone, we hit the voice memo, and then we bought like a cheap little microphone from Amazon. And it was a microphone that split into two, and so we could never move because the minute you move, it picks up any sound. So if if you put it on like your blazer or like your jacket, like the minute you move, so we would just be there like, hey guys, hey, it's the Free Thinking Latinos and this and that, And it went pretty well. We created like a social media for it, and then that is when we both kind of created our own social media. He went through his name, and I went by the Conservative Latino. And again, the reason why I went through the Conservative Latino was because I really wanted to hide my identity because I didn't know how people were going to react.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in my name, Conservative Latino. There's no guessing as to what my page is about.
Yeah.
I'm a Latino who's conservative, and I will be speaking truth. Not my truth, God's truth.
Amen.
And to this day, people still fight me all the time. They'll come into my page and they'll be like, well, that's not what God teaches. I'm like, oh, really? No. And then we'll go toe to toe. And we'll be like, here's the message right here.
Come on.
Like, we're not called to be allies to darkness. So why can you call yourself a pro-abortion Christian?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's crazy with the people that come into my page and they're like, really? The name itself didn't give it away. And so in 2018, I didn't even have my real picture there or anything because, again, I just didn't know how people were going to react. I knew that the nation was up in arms about Donald Trump winning, and people hated conservatives and people hated Republicans. And I mean, again, like I said, it's California. I wouldn't want someone to find out I was going to a school so they can call and be like, do you know you have a Nazi Hitler guy going to your school, And I'm like, oh, the brown guy? The son of the immigrant guy? That guy? No way. So we just started with the podcast. I went with Conservative Latino, and I noticed that my message was well received within the Hispanic community. Even some moderates and some kind of left of center were like, yeah, you're right. Like, we are culturally conservative. But that doesn't mean that we should be voting Republican because you're racist, because of this, because of that. And then when you argue the points, when you argue the policies, that is where they either go back to their friends and flee because they have nothing to tell you, or they start opening their mind and say, you know what, you're right. I never thought of it. I was always just emotional about my reactions. I wasn't logical in the way that we thought. And I think to myself, like, even as Christians, we're called not to just emotionally react, but we need to say, well, what would Jesus do?
That's right.
What did he command? What is the written word?
Amen.
It's not just about you saying, like, well, this makes me feel good, so therefore it's right.
Come
No,
on.
what does Jesus say?
Wow.
Right? What does the Bible say? And so this is the way it became for me with politics, where I'm like, okay, sure, you're saying this guy is racist, but show me the video, show me the evidence. And even now, it's crazy how everything is so emotionally based that even just speaking truth, even just speaking facts, even citing sources, using their own science against them, they'll still call you like a white supremacist, Nazi, etc., etc. And I'm like, I'm literally using a CNN article, my friend. Like, I don't know how else to sell you your own garbage. You know, like, I don't know how else to approach you, but here's the truth, and this is something that I learned early on in my page. I would spend hours and hours to the point where it was actually affecting my marriage, where my wife's like, you need to stop being on your phone so much. You're not coming to the dinner table anymore. You're not paying attention to your kids because you're always fighting these liberals online. And I'm like, oh, just one more, please, don't drag me away. Like, you know. But what I learned is this. Through years of debating, a lot of people that just think differently from me is there are people who genuinely want to listen to your message. And there are people that just absolutely hate you, not because of who you are, not because of the way you do your hair, or the way you dress, or the way you carry yourself. It is because they know that you have the one true King of Kings inside of your heart. That is why they hate you. They hate you because of who you represent and the word you're spreading. And my message has always been, it's not about Republican, it's not about Democrat. It's about God wants.
Yes, that's right.
And right now, there's one party that aligns more with my conservative views, and that is the Republican Party. And so when I make those connections, people are like, I get it now. Like, okay, I agree. And so the problem is, so as the years went by and we were doing it, and the same speech class, by the way, my very last speech was a persuasive speech. We did 3 big speeches in that class. And my very last one, worth like 15% of my grade, and I wanted to keep my A. So I told the teacher, I'm like, okay, a persuasive speech. And I was like, well, you're a speech teacher. You've been a speech teacher for probably over a decade now. And he's like, yeah, you know, I told you guys at the beginning of class, I've been teaching for 23 years speech class, and he helps, you know, with speech class and teaching kids or even older kids like myself how to properly do speeches and talks and everything. And he told me, I told him, I'm like, I want to wow you. Like, I know you've probably heard every persuasive speech there is, but what is something you've never heard? And he's like, honestly, there's probably nothing that you could probably wow me with. And he's like, I've heard it all, but you know what? If you follow the guidelines that I have, you follow my little packet that I give you guys of what I'm looking for, the criteria, then you're most likely going to get an A. He's like, let's face it, man, you have an A right now, you have 96%, you're probably going to nail it. Don't worry about it. But I'm like, no, that's not good enough for me. I'm like, I really want this A. Like, I really need a wow. And so we had to submit what our persuasive speech was going to be about. And so my persuasive speech was going to try to persuade everyone how Donald Trump is actually a really good guy.
Oh, wow. Oh, my.
Now, before this, I had never made it publicly that I was a Trump supporter. I myself didn't even really consider myself like a staunch Republican or anything like that. I was just like, I just want to, like, let's see if I can pull this off. You know, and that speech was so good. I convinced myself. I was like, yeah, this guy really is a good guy. Because it got to the point where I was researching his history, all the work that he's done. A lot of people don't know that he has like a medal of freedom because he's next to like Rosa Parks and Muhammad Ali for all the work that he's done in the inner city youth and the blacks and the Hispanics. And when I saw that picture, I'm like, oh, that's that picture that Occupy Wall Street. I don't know if you guys have heard of that movement. They're very leftist. I never knew that they were very leftist, by the way, in my defense. But they passed that as, oh, this is fake. This is a fake photo. It's been photoshopped. So when I saw it for myself using different sources, I'm like, oh, this is that Photoshop video. Why can't I show the real photo where it's just him? But no, he really did receive this medal because he helped inner city. And I was just like, this is the same rate, like Donald Trump, like that same president. And so when I started doing history, it got to the point where I was like, okay, there's no way he's this good. There's no way he's this smart, this businessman that was able to get. I know people criticize him for the small loan of $1 million, but guess what? He has other siblings that are not as successful, that are not as ambitious, that are not as go-getting as he was. And this is why I credit him. I'm like, look, I read his book, Art of the Deal. If you hear him talk in Art of the Deal, I had to listen to it in Audible because I was driving a lot at the time. But I listened to it and I'm like, this is literally the same Donald Trump, the same 4D chess Trump. Like he knows what he's doing. And so I made the persuasive speech and I even bought a hat to like surprise everyone. I'm like, man, I'll even wear the costume. I'll buy the hat and everything.
Oh my God.
And so when I did the speech, I put on the hat and everything and people were like,
Oh,
there's a Nazi in our class? No way. And so from there, I've just been the conservative Latino and just got to the point where I'm like, I need to do more. Like I want to inform the community. Like the same way I researched, the same way I was able to convince myself, I need to convince other people to listen. The same way we were able to convince my friends or my schoolmates, I need to be able to convince other people through information. And one of the most demanded things out there for the Hispanic and Latino community is Spanish conservative news. And so we tried to do it with the free thinking Latinos and it ended up not being so good because I'll be honest, my Spanish is a little bit broken and my friends is extremely broken. And so I felt very, it was awesome to witness as I was like bashing him over the head with facts in Spanish, but he couldn't say things in Spanish. And I'm like, man, this is so sad. I'm just feeding you in everything, man. Like, we're gonna have to just switch it up to English again. And so we couldn't do it. But then now I have a Spanish podcast. It's called Conservative Latino. And people say like, why not just call it like El Latino Conservador, which is like a direct translation. I'm like, two things. I really like El Conservative Latino. That's always been my name brand. But also because I think it speaks to us firstborn Hispanic Americans that we speak a lot of Spanglish. And sometimes we'll start sentences in English y terminamos en español, and sometimes we don't realize que lo estamos haciendo until you're like, oh wait, I'm speaking in español, pero también estoy hablando en English, you know? So you're just like, oh wait. So I like that idea. And so like people say like, hey man, that's not how you say it in Spanish. I'm like, I know it's not how you translate conservative Latino in Spanish, but that's the way I want to keep it because I think it speaks to the Spanglish community. And it's going really well. Thank God, we have, I think it's like 15 different countries that listen in right now.
Oh, man.
Like Peru. We got people in Spain, we got people in Peru, we got people in Colombia, we got people in Venezuela tuning in. And they're like, man, this is about time. We got something like in Spanish. And again, it's one of those things where I told myself, I'm like, I think one of the things about leaders that God calls is that you never see yourself as a leader. Like, me? Like, no, there's no way. I don't look great. I don't work out. I don't have the fastest mile time, But it's just, if you think about it, this is, even when Jesus came to this earth, he could have chosen the priests, the people that he could have just easily convinced, like, hey, these priests right here, they already got the ear and the eyes and the minds of the people. Let me just convince them who I am because I am Jesus, right? And we can just work together and then boom, done deal. But who did he go out and seek? 12 regular common people, right? Fishermen, just normal, ordinary people. And he transformed them. Now it's just like, God, transform me. I want to be used. However you want to use me, just use me however it is, whether it's for a year, or maybe I'm just a stepping stone. Maybe I encourage someone who's going to come in even greater than I am and larger, and that speaks better Spanish. But who knows? But I have talked to a lot of people that say like, hey man, because of your platform, I'm bold enough to speak up. I'm no longer ashamed to be Republican. I'm no longer ashamed to just speak out. Hey, you know what? Even just 2 weeks ago, I went to go get a haircut with my brother who's a barber. Irving, Irving, I'm not sure if many of you know my middle brother, Irving. He's the one that suffered the accident. He got burnt in his body, and we raised some funds for him. But so he's a barber. He's enjoying it. He's doing a lot better, thankfully. And when I went to go talk in his shop, like, first of all, I didn't know I was going to be talking at his shop. It didn't happen that way. But I just went to go get a haircut, and I noticed that as I was talking to him about politics, everyone tuned in. We had 2 other barbers, and then we had the people inside the barbershop. And I was talking to them in Spanish, and I was just telling them about like the Republican Party, this, that. And like by the time I left, the owner was just like, because the way we had to go inside that barbershop was through the back. They had everything taped off and everything. And as I started telling them what's open and what's not open, the people that are standing up, the people that are raising their voice, the pastors that are defying orders, this barbershop owner felt emboldened. He's like, we need to open up tomorrow. I'm like, well, hey, buddy, like, hold on. Before you do this, you need to know the risks that are involved, because everything that we do is a risk. Being a Christian is a risk.
Amen.
I don't care what people think that, hey, it's mainstream, oh, it's cool to be and hip to be conservative or to be Christian. It's really sucking every single day more and more to be a Christian. Not for us, because we know where we're headed after, right? But just as a regular citizen of this world, we're watching churches being torn down, statues being torn down, our brothers and sisters being stabbed even, in DC and stuff like that. People are just God-fearing people. And so through the years, that's what I've been working on, is the Conservative Latino. And, I registered as a Republican. And to this day, I always tell people that's not the answer.
That's right.
This party is not the answer. It's the answer is within us.
Amen.
It's we the people. And I know that people use that like as a coin. I know politicians use that word to try to identify themselves as that. I'm like, no, you guys are not we the people. We're we the people. The people that are pushing back, the people that are opening our churches, the people that still go to work, the people that defy what this world wants us to adhere to. These norms, these new cartoons that are pansexual friendly and transgender friendly and all of this, we are the rebels now. We are the people pushing back. And to me, this is what I say. A lot of people say like, hey man, but like politics and Christ, they don't really, this and that. I'm like, well, keep thinking that way. And that's why we have to hide now to worship. Because we have been convinced that the good Christian is the silent, stay-at-home Christian. The one that just sits at home. And I've had Christians tell me this. They're like, why would you go out and risk people's lives? Just stay at home, just pray there. The church is inside of your heart. Just stay there, this, that. And I'm like, holy smokes. I'm like, well, guess what? One day, when it's late at night, it's 2023. It's like those memes, like point of view, like, it's 2023, the police has been defunded, there's no one there to protect you, and you've been one of these Christians that haven't been pushing back and haven't been fighting and haven't been standing up to the government to just be able to openly worship Christ in a country that protects your right to do it in the Constitution itself. You're going to be under your bed, hiding, praying to Jesus, that the people that just walked into your house because they know you're a Christian, right? You're going to be praying that he saves you, but it's going to be too late then. Because you didn't do anything. You didn't rise up. You didn't speak out. You didn't congregate. You took away all those freedoms. You took away all those things that you had, and you said to yourself, this is what Jesus wanted. Jesus wanted us to just die under our beds in silence. And I think to myself, like Peter, right? Where he rebuked Jesus' name 3 times. Right? He denied knowing Jesus 3 times. And I think to myself, and this is what people say, like, yeah, man, but we're going to be persecuted anyway. I'm like, but why expedite the process?
Come on.
Like, what? So like, I know my family and eventually will die of old age. Does that mean that we just walk into oncoming traffic? Because, hey, guess what? We're going to die anyway. No, that's not what we're supposed to be doing.
Amen.
And I think that when Jesus told, Peter, or that he spoke about that 3 times he would deny his name, it's not him saying, no matter what you do, your body will just not physically allow you to say, yes, I believe in Jesus. It's not because Jesus spoke the words, but because he already knew that in Peter's heart, he was going to be scared doing those 3 times, and it would overwhelm his loyalty to Christ, and he would just say, no, I don't know who he is. No, I know that wasn't me. And I think that when he spoke about the persecuted Christians, it's not because he condoned us to death. It's not because he said, yes, I want my people to be persecuted. But he knew that there would come a time where Christians would become so complacent, so fearful of government, that he's like, sadly, this is how we will be persecuted, quietly. Just because we refused to stand up. And I gotta say, a lot of people ask me like, well, what do we do now? What's gonna happen now? This and that. How many times in history has scenarios like this happen, right? We had like the Black Plague, we had the Spanish flu, all that stuff. And I'm imagining to myself that Christians back then just said, hey, just let this happen because this is the rapture. Just let it happen in pastors and then we can just go on. But guess what didn't happen? The rapture didn't happen. So who are we to say that this is the time that like, hey, just let it happen so that we can just finally go to heaven? Please just let us be persecuted. No! What are you talking about? When did Christ say that we should not be the light of this world? When did he say that we're not supposed to stand up against evil? When did he say that? Never.
Come on.
He didn't say, hey, I'm going to put you on this earth. Yes, you're not from there. So therefore, just, whenever they try to bash you, just let that be. That's it. That's there for you. Now, fighting looks differently for Christians. Fighting doesn't mean, hey guys, I just brought a truckload of AR, ARs and it sounds very theory, right? But even this right now is fighting back.
Come on.
This right now. This is our fighting back right here. Is staying open, defying government orders. Not because we don't believe in a pandemic, but because through their own science, with a 99% recovery rate, right? It's like, I think you're more susceptible to some kind of side effect from this vaccine. I think it's like 95% effective, and then 5% that you might have some kind of side effect. I posted a video not too long ago about the nurse that got the pandemic, the vaccine, right? And then she's giving the thing, and she's like, oh yeah, this was great, and we're super wonderful to. Hold up a minute, I'm not feeling so good. She ended up passing out. Now, I'm not doing this to create any kind of fear monger or distrust or anything like that, but let's be honest. In America, Big Pharma controls a lot. And it's not just Big Pharma, we're talking social media, we're talking mainstream media. They don't have Christian values and morals in the interest. Because if they did, our churches would not be shut down at all. Right? We wouldn't have the media telling that Christians are selfish by remaining open because, hey, if you worship, there might be like a little speck, and I'm just like, are you kidding me with all of this? But Black Lives Matter is allowed to go out there and protest and throw things on fire and burn our flag and burn our Bibles. I don't know if you guys saw that video. Right? When I went to Portland, Oregon, which is crazy because I was like, I don't really feel like going to Portland, Oregon. Not because I was scared by any measure, but it was. We had already, I think it was like not James Cook, it was Elijah Schaefer. I don't know if you guys follow him. You had George Ventura, you had Drew Hernandez from Lives Matter Official. You had a couple independent sources already there, journalists covering the event. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, I feel like it's an overkill if we send 2 more, which was James Clute and then myself. Luckily, they ended up, George and all of them were like, dude, we're tired of being out here. Like, we've been covering for weeks now, we kind of want to go home. And so we kind of like, tag, you're it now. And in go James Klug and myself. And when we went, that very night, I'll never forget that, we went and we were just kind of like, well, it kind of sucks because at that time, they ended up withdrawing the federal troops. At that first night that we were supposed to cover, and I'm thinking to myself, like, ooh, that viewer count's about to go high, this is that, and sometimes I think selfishly, unfortunately. But I'm just like, man, I wonder how many people I can spread this message to. And I was like, I'm ready to go. Like, we got a notification saying, hey, the federal troops were withdrawn. I ended up being a decently peaceful 3 nights. But what I was able to capture, and I think that this kind of rung across the Christian world, was we had a truck come in with a bunch of Bibles. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, oh wow, Jesus works in mysterious ways. I'm like, here all these people are about to convert, and this and that. I didn't know why the Bibles were there. I just thought that maybe it was a local church that said, hey, we see chaos, we see all these problems happening here in Portland. Why don't we go and preach the Word of God and distribute Bibles? Wishful thinking. That's not what the Bibles were for. The Bibles were there so that people can burn them. A truckload of Bibles, that is correct. And so as the fires started that evening, they started grabbing the Bibles and they started tearing out the pages and they started throwing them into the fire. And I'll be honest, I've seen and I've gone through a lot in my life, but nothing resonant. I mean, it was like borderline hate. but also just God have mercy on their souls.
Yeah.
Because all I wanted to do was just kind of like press. I'm like, God, where's the button where I can instantly get transformed into a crusader? I'm like, just a button, and then all my armor comes on, kind of like Iron Man, and then just take out my sword. I'm like, all right, you heathens, like, how dare you, But it just filled me with so much sadness, to be honest. And as I was recording this, I'm like, I need to share this immediately. Because Christians need to wake up. These people preach social justice. They don't care about you. They don't care about anything except instilling their own communist manifesto. And here's the thing. I always talk that the problems that we're having right now is between American or patriots and then these communists, right? But it's not. It's just good versus evil. It's as plain and simple as it gets. Evil will always come in many different names. It'll hijack movements. It'll hijack feminism. It'll hijack social justice. Open borders, please. Yes, just as a good Christian, this and that. But the more I study, especially I'm studying right now like early 1900s history. I'm specifically focused on like right-wing ideology, like these fascists that came into power, like Hitler, Mussolini, Sir Oswald Mosley, I believe his name is, and then Cornelio Cuadrano. He's from Romania. I wanted to understand like, how can any Christian be okay with what they were doing? And when you see the things that they were fighting, I'm not saying that what they did is right by any means of the imagination, but when you see what they were fighting, it's literally exactly the same thing we're fighting today.
Wow.
They were talking about how the church had been infiltrated. They had been talking about how academia had been infiltrated by Marxist communists. How this whole open border policy was a ruse to get all these Marxists into these countries so that they can destroy their way of life and just implement their communism.
Wow.
Because they don't have a religion, right? Black Lives Matter. A lot of people don't know, but their organizers are Marxists. They've openly admitted that.
That's right.
So people say like, well, you can't blame all like the protesters. No, I don't blame them. I blame the people that are not informing them of who their leaders are. It's like if I started congregating in a church and I just dismiss the pastor's actions because I'm like, well, I'm just a member. Whatever he does behind closed doors, that's between him. Like, no, if your church or if your church pastor believes in something that is ungodly,
that's right,
something that is fighting against the nuclear family, then you either need to leave or you need to tell and let everyone know, like, hey guys, this is our pastor, like, look what's happening. And I've seen it happen in a lot of churches. A lot of churches where pastors had to be either removed or had to step down because of things that were happening in secret. Because, man, I feel bad for religious leaders. I'm not bad in the sense that, poor them or this is that, but I mean, they have a duty to God to lead the masses. And if they're leading them astray, if they're like these new woke pastors saying that Jesus was a pansexual who had a gay lover,
oh my God,
I'm just thinking to myself, like, what in the world are we doing?
Come on.
And what sucks is that you have people that know what's right. Pastors that are scared to speak out because they're like, well, I don't want to become a target.
Come on.
I don't want to be sought after from the government. I don't want the government to look into my business. I don't want to lose that 501c3 status. And it sucks because you have a lot of pastors. I mean, right now, you have not just a youth, but an entire nation that is looking for leadership. And they are looking to pastors like yourself. The one from Calvary Chapel Hills, what's his name? Jack Hicks. They're looking for not just political leaders, but more than anything, we need godly leaders. And that's why I try to mix the two. Not because I say that if you're a Republican, you are a better Christian. It's not about that.
That's right.
But it's about using your voice, your powers as an American, as a voting American, to just completely get rid of this evil the democratic way or democracy way, right? It's not for us to just not be involved. It's not for us to sit it out. It's not for us to just be like, oh, that's your agenda? Sure, just let them vote it in. We're going to die anyway. Why would we expedite that process again?
That's right.
So when I tell people you need to vote, it's not because I have this trust in this government or because Donald Trump was perfect. I mean, the guy's been married how many times, right? But again, God chooses imperfect people.
Amen.
And sometimes it's the most imperfect that will end up surprising you in their courage and their ambition to do right by the American people. People always tell me like, man, dude, tú eres un trompero. You know, like, you're like this Trumpster, dude. Like, just give it up already. You know, this is that. And I'm like, dude, but it's just, if only you knew what he really stood for. It's not about the man. It's not about the guy that eats McDonald's every day, right? It's about what he stands for. What is he fighting for? And to me personally, and I'm, in no way am I trying to inflate his role, but I just really feel like he's one of the last ones really standing up to everything. Yeah. You know, whether it's the leftist ideology or this new, this new normal they're trying to create on us. He's always said, people always want to give him flack because of the vaccine. I'm like, did he say he was going to mandate it? You got to remember, a lot of people are, I know with the vaccine, personally, not a doctor here, folks. I'm not taking the vaccine personally. Neither is my family, right? Because again, looking at the science, 99 points. I'd rather. It's like looking at a bridge, and then the bridge said, have like a little sign out there, like, hey, this bridge is 99.9999% effective. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'm gonna swim. I think I'm gonna just swim across this bridge because this bridge is only 99.9 effective. So I'm not gonna take it up to chance with that, especially seeing all the videos. Not hearing about it, someone told me, or, hey, la señora de la esquina, she said that, hey, no. It's about you research yourself, inform yourself, and then you make that decision. Is that what you really want to do for you and your family? And so when people talk to me about like standing up, and I'm like, this is so beyond Trump. This is so beyond the man that is Donald J. Trump, or his family, or his wife, or Merry Christmas, or Happy Holiday. It's beyond that. It's our Western way of life. It is our religion. The United States is a majority, predominant Christian nation, and we are handing it over to foreign gods. We are appointing people in leadership positions, and this is something that I'm also delving into. And Pastor, you probably know a little bit more about this than I do. But I was reading a story about this famous doctor who had defected the Communist Party of USA, CPUSA. And this was back in the early 1900s. And when she defected the Communist Party USA, she had spoken about how she was really high up there. And she was a teacher. And being a teacher at this university, she was able to easily recruit the youth. Because unfortunately, while we're all working 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, just to make ends meet, where do we send our children? To school. Today, honestly, what I call them is indoctrination camps. That's what I call them. Because history was written by the victors, and I know a lot of you, it might be controversial, but World War II, who ended up winning? Communists did. Russia did. Exactly. And I'm not saying that it would have been better with the fascists, not what I'm saying. But they ended up writing history. They got to decide the numbers, they got to decide who was the evil people, and what ideology they were going to push forward. But that is what I call it today, is these indoctrination camps. And so, while we're all working, that is where we're sending our children, because they know that if they just control academia, that they will control the minds of our youth while we're at work and we're trying to fight. And so we need to fight back. We need to, to get politically involved. Use that tool that God has given us to voice our opinions, to voice our, and impose. People always say, oh, well, we just don't want to get anyone angry. We just don't want to anger anyone. And I'm like, but Jesus said that I have not come to bring peace. I have come to bring a sword. It's going to be man against son. It's going to be daughter against mother. I mean, we're not here to live a peaceful life.
That's right.
Right? We're here to stir things up.
Yeah, come on.
We're here to be the light in the darkness. And what does light do? It drives it up. So I was reading this post that said, here I thought I wasn't going to be able to make it for an hour. And I'm like, man, I'm wondering if they'll stay here. No, but I was reading a post that said, if you do not impose your morals and your values and your God on the nation or the people around you, someone else will. Now, what does that mean? It means, sure, choose to be quiet, choose to leave this building today and then just go home in quiet. Hopefully no one sees your I Love Jesus bumper sticker on the way home. Everyone just go home, nobody talk about anything, we'll just worship at home, etc. But it's not about that, because if we're not actively recruiting soldiers for Christ, if we're not out there actively informing the masses about what these progressive agendas are going to do to us as a nation, as a Christian, this is what just blows my mind. I'm looking at statistics and all this stuff. California, over 40% Hispanic and Latino. Hispanics and Latinos, over 90% identify as Christian or Catholic. Why did we just vote in all blue? If they're the ones for abortion. We have Scott Weiner in San Francisco just passed a law for basically allowing sort of pedophilia. Saying that if it's within 10 years, right, that as long as it's consensual, they're able to have these sexual relations with underage children.
My God.
And people just don't know that. Right? Didn't Donald Trump tweeted out saying that there was a study done, or a poll done, that 10% of people, I think it was in the state of Georgia, 10% of the voters had no idea about the Hunter Biden's laptop.
Yep.
Who doesn't know about Hunter Biden's laptop by chance? Okay, so Hunter Biden's laptop came out right before, well, it's been around for a while. The FBI admitted that they've actually had it for quite some time. Luckily, the guy that worked so the way it worked was Biden Hunter, son of Joe Biden. He dropped off his laptop to be repaired because there was some stuff that was wrong with it. Ended up leaving it there, and the technician was going through it and trying to fix it, and he found stuff in the hard drive that he's like, ooh, this needs to be reported to the FBI because it's disgusting what's on here. We're talking about like underage sexual relationships with girls, right? Him smoking crack, doing all these things, right, that were all exposed. And so 2 copies were made by this technician. One was sent to the FBI, and the other one somehow made its way to Rudy Giuliani's office. And that's where they messed up, because the FBI stayed quiet, didn't push it, mainstream media called it a conspiracy. And it's funny because I'm literally like, my friend's like, hey, watch this video. And I'm like, oh dude, I can't watch this is really graphic. You know what he's doing, and this and this and that, smoking crack, this and that. I'm watching the video and I'm like, no, yeah, that's him. 100% that's him. It's not like this deep fake that they make these videos now with people's heads, you know. This is real. And then I go to mainstream media and they're like, it's 100% fabricated. It's these fascist alt-right wingers, you know, that just want to spread misinformation. And I'm like, if we were wrong, you wouldn't have to censor us or ban us from your platforms, right? And so, you know, it's going to be a long battle, because people always, one of the questions again that I get recently is, well, what can we do? And I think that when you ask yourself, what can we do? You want an overnight solution. You want, okay, if we just do this tonight, Anthony said, if we do this for 1 hour, then tomorrow we've regained our country. The infiltration, going back to the lady, I'm so sorry, I never finished that story, but it leads into what I'm about to close with right now. She talked about how when she was in the highest position of the Communist Party of the USA, she was able to recruit 1,100 communist agents into the Catholic Church. Wow. This is just her by herself. In New York by herself, not including anyone else that did this in any other state or any other nation. Why? Because the wars don't look like you see in the movies anymore. We're not like looking out and like looking out our windows like, man, when are those ships supposed to be here? I keep hearing about these communists, but I don't see them. They're already here. They've already infiltrated education, religion, academia, mainstream media,
sports,
right? Sports, absolutely. You can't even watch the NBA anymore without Black Lives Matter being plastered there. And again, do Black Lives matter? Absolutely, they matter. All of them matter. All lives matter. Black lives matter. Hispanic lives matter. White lives matter. All those lives matter because they matter to Christ.
Amen.
Right? And so it should matter to all of us.
Amen.
But it's all being hijacked and done by Marxist specific targeting. You think they came up with Black Lives Matter just randomly? It was just like, hey brother, what should we call like this organization? They're like, oh, why not just call it? No. They hired. If you look at how Black Lives Matter spends their money, 2019, they got $1 billion, right? Most of that money went to Democratic candidates, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, even Amy Klobuchar somehow. But which I just didn't think she was a great candidate, to be honest. But what 50% of that billion went just to marketing. How can we market our brand? Imagine today, right now, imagine if your church just received a donation for $1 billion and someone just said, why don't we spend half of that in marketing?
Wow.
Everyone's gonna look at you and be like, are you dumb? Like, are you serious right now? Just in marketing, $500 million? But because they know what marketing will do. They know what that name brand carries. Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, 3 million raised 2018. Because imagine being anti-Black Lives Matter. People are going to think you're crazy.
Racist, yeah.
You're a racist. Or being anti-fascist.
Yeah.
But they chose those names and they chose those words specifically because they don't want people to just easily be able to dismiss that name.
Yeah.
And when people come and ask you, you guys have seen that video, right? Where Black Lives Matter and Antifa, they're roaming the streets. There's people sitting down in restaurants and they're demanding, raise your hand as a fist and say Black Lives Matter. We need you to say that because imagine saying, I don't want to say that. It makes you seem like so Black lives doesn't matter to you? You know, because that's what they do. And I'll never forget that they asked the woman, like, why? Are you Christian? Are you Christian? Is that why you won't do it? And I was just like, holy smokes, that could be anybody. That can be any Christian, right? It can be any of us.
Right.
And they specifically did that. And this woman talked about the infiltration of the church. I think Dr. Taylor Marshall, I think he's a pastor as well. He's got a book that I just started reading talking about the infiltration of the church that happened. And how there's a lot of, and here's the thing, it's not just grabbing 1,100 communists and just putting them in the congregation like, go at it. These people were appointed as priests, bishops, cardinals. They don't mess around. They won't just install a communist in the congregation to kind of stir ideology. They put them in the highest ranks so that they indoctrinate you.
That's right.
They make it seem like, hey, we are a Christian church, but it's best we stay home. Hey, we are a Christian church, but don't ever push back. Just always allow them. If they're going to burn your church, just let them burn it. If they want to burn your house, just let them burn it. We'll get you another one. This is not. But to them, this is what people don't understand. That is symbology. They are sending a message. This happened, I believe, somewhere in South America, where they're burning down churches. They're going inside, all in the name of feminism, because they refuse to legalize abortion rights. And so the feminist movement has been hijacked by communists. They're out there burning churches. And they're in there in the Catholic Church, and I know that we're a Protestant here, but I sympathize and I will march with my Catholic brothers 100% to defend everything that is our Christ, that is our God.
That's right.
We cannot just, I think that even just the division among us, granted I understand and I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes or anything like that, but even the division among us that we're telling ourselves, I will never help a Catholic because, well, he's Catholic, I'm not Catholic. That's how they divide us.
That's right.
That is how they keep us isolated and they keep us in little rooms like, well, don't help each other out because of this. Meanwhile, the entire left, the entire satanic movements, feminism, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, all this stuff, they all work together. They'll march under their banner of social justice, communism, socialism, whatever it is, because they have a goal to achieve. And that's something that we need to wake up to as a Christian right. We need to unite. We need to mobilize. It looks different, like I said, but they've been going at this since the early 1900s. Everything you're seeing right now, this isn't by chance. People always say, like, how did we get here? This has been decades. Decades. And I mean, and if you're a Christian, this has been thousands of years in the making because Satan's been around that long.
That's right.
But what we're seeing right now, this organization of the left and promoting all these, I mean, imagine promoting to women that abortion is empowering. Like, isn't that nuts that women say, well, if I can just have an abortion, I'll feel empowered. I have that option. Who cares about a clump of cells? Because this has been decades in the works. Teaching children what's okay and what's not okay. Hollywood. How long have they been around? I always say this jokingly, but it just comes to show. When I was growing up Pentecostal Christian, it was a very legalistic church. Very legalistic. The women couldn't dress like men, or we couldn't go to theme parks. Women couldn't have positions. It's very, very legalistic. And I would always tell my mom, like, well, why can't we go to Disneyland? Why can't we go to this? And like, oh no. And she would tell me in Spanish, esos son cosas satánicos, esos son, like those are pedophiles, and this and that. And I would always say, because I always wanted to rebel against my mom in the church, I'm like, man, you guys are crazy thinking that this, oh wait, you're, and then I'm watching everything that's happening with Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, for like Gay Pride Month, they had SpongeBob come out as a gay sponge or whatever, and I'm like, is he like asexual? Because that's how sponges reproduce. But it's crazy, and I'm just like, Mom,
you're right.
You were right. I'm like, all these things. Now, again, God uses discernment in all of us. You know by reading the Bible what you should be doing, what you should not be doing. If something doesn't feel right, chances are it's because you know you're not doing right. And this is something that I always talk, and I always have to reel myself in. Don't go so politically engaged that you forget who you are. You are a son of Christ and a daughter of Christ. Don't get so involved in politics that you start hating people and not the sin. Right? This is something that happened to me not too long ago, and this is what I'll end it with. But when I went to DC this last time, a lot of you know that on my social media, I go on there and I record a lot of the fights, a lot of the problems that are happening. I've been doing this for over a year. That's how I've been able to capture videos of the Bible being burnt, all that stuff. I always go out to these events. I think January 6th, there's like another rally happening in DC. I'll be flying out to that because I think it might get a little bit crazy there. Does anyone know what January 6th is? Why this date is super specific? Yes. That is when Congress gets together with Mike Pence. So the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, that's the only time she doesn't have power in that house. It goes straight to the Vice President. Good. So what'll happen? Good, exactly. Hopefully good. Hopefully they do a job. But what'll end up happening is that's the day that they formally recognize who really won in the chambers of Congress. Because remember, up until then, it's been up to the states and the courts, and they have all these legal battles, etc. January 6th is the last Hail Mary throw by the Trump administration to overturn this election, because what will happen is they'll get the electoral votes. And I don't know if you guys have heard that there's Republicans that have sent their own set of alternate electoral votes. This matters. Why does it matter? Because Mike Pence has a decision to make. Do I go with the Democrat ones or do I go with the Republican ones? He can switch it if he believes that there's enough evidence to overturn his electoral votes. Now, it's not easy, because what will happen is when they present those electoral votes, he will say, are there any objections? And that is when Republicans need to say, we have some objections. Come on. And they can present all that evidence and say, look at what's happening, look at the videos, look at the testimonies, all the affidavits, all that. Come on, Jesus. And they can say, all right. Now, Mike Pence can do one of two things. He can either say, I'm not recognizing the Democrats, I'm recognizing the Republicans, or he can say, I'm not recognizing either. Why? Because he's like, well, there's so much dispute, there's so much evidence, but I'm not a judge. Who am I to say? I'm not going to give the electoral votes to anybody. This can happen in 8 states. 8 states that Donald Trump was winning the night of the election, but it was overturned to Biden with the Biden dumps, the Biden vote dumps, right? So so Anthony, what happens if they don't recognize the votes for either candidate? Well, then the electoral votes get taken away from both candidates. But in all those 8 states, Joe Biden won. So really doesn't mean any electoral votes away from President Trump. It's votes taken away from Biden. And what ends up happening, neither president reaches 270 electoral votes needed to win for president. So then what happens then? It goes to the states, it goes to the House, which in that case, every state representative will be given 1 electoral vote, 1. And if you take a look at that beautiful map, way more red states than there are blue states, and it is said that Donald Trump will win 30 to 20. That's called a contingent vote. Wow. That is if Mike Pence does what he's supposed to do, and Republicans do what they're supposed to do. Like I said, this isn't about Republicans or Democrats. It's good versus evil. If these Republicans are establishment and they're not God-fearing, they will allow it to happen. Because they're like, well, what do we care? We need to get reelected. I don't want to push the buttons because we rely on Democrats to win as well. Right? Isn't that what congressional people do? They'll play politics, they'll play the fence, they'll be lukewarm. Right? And they'll be like, well, I don't want to do nothing too drastic to the right or to the left because I need both of the votes. I want to make sure that I'm still making money and that if there's another pandemic, I still have security, right? And so that's going to be the day. So Donald Trump said, we're going to be out here January 6th. There's going to be another rally. And so what ended up happening the last time that I was in D.C., I ended up getting pepper sprayed on accident. I didn't step on a pepper spray and then it sprayed me, but what ended up happening was I was covering the fights between the Proud Boys. I don't know if a lot of you know who the Proud Boys are. They're kind of a lot more right-wing. I joined them last time, and I joined them last time because I wanted to record and see, like, oh, maybe this will end up fighting, and I want to document everything.
Seems like it.
Yeah, I know, right? But I noticed that they would always pray. They always prayed before they went out, and they always prayed when they came back, and they thanked God for, covering them and everything. So what ended up happening was Proud Boys came up behind Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and the police wasn't able to intervene fast enough. So there ended up being a couple brawls. I was recording everything. I'm like, I was recording everything, and then the police finally started making its way from behind Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Some Antifa ran behind police lines, ironically, right? Because they want to defund the police.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then some of the Antifa were scared of the police, so they pushed toward us. Well, the Proud Boys. And so when they pushed into the Proud Boys did their thing, and they would trip them over, and they would just get into brawl fights and everything. And the Antifa guys would spray people. So I was documenting a fight, and when the Antifa guy was let go, because believe it or not, it's kind of weird how it operates. Proud Boys are like, look, we're not here to kill anybody. We just want to rough up their feathers so that they don't ever come back, and then we let them go. Every single time I've seen a brawl, it's never been with weapons. It's always just like, fist fighting, whatever. And then they let the guy go. They pick him up, they wipe him off, and they're like, all right, let this be a lesson. Don't come back again. Stop messing with the people. Stop going into businesses and destroying them. All right, now go on. Go back to your mom's basement, wherever you come from. And so when the guy got up, he looked at me, and I was recording him, and then he sprayed me. And so police came, they gave me medical attention. Wow. And as I was getting medical attention, the same guy came back and sprayed me again. And I was like, man, this guy must have it out for me, And so that ended up happening to me. And so, but it was just wild. It was just really wild. It was, this is what we're fighting. People want to think that this is all going away. It's not going away because this is decades in the planning. This has been, imagine, you see doctors, right, that say like, oh, if you don't take the vaccine, you're not, because they knew they even had to infiltrate the voices of reason, the trust of the people. And that's why Jesus, I believe, is using random people, whether it be a pastor or an activist or a dad or a mom or whoever it is, because those are now the voices of reason today. For too long we trusted government, for too long we trusted doctors, for too long we trusted teachers, and even some of the police are not on our side. And so he's using just ordinary people. He says, I choose you, I choose you, I choose you, I choose you, I choose you. You're all going to carry my message. Of evil among all ranks, and now we question everything. Those news anchors we used to love so much, we're like, no more Jorge Ramos. This guy, no more of that. Why? Because you all have the discernment of God. Because you all know what's right or wrong, and you're willing to stand up to it, and you're willing to stand up to evil. So thank you guys so much for having me.